Stuart Holbrook has spent his life in the world of collectors. As president of Theriault, the world's leader in the auction of antique dolls and figurative art for over 30 years, he's managed the often personal and always wild world of collecting and collectors. His market expertise and knowledge of trends comes to life in The Curious Collector, where he shares his experience and experiences in real-life stories, alongside sage advice on how to build great collections within the happy life of a collector.
Hello again, everybody. It's Stuart Holbrook, The Curious Collector, and we are back for episode 25 on the list. A momentous occasion. Throw out the confetti. Everybody cheer, and we made it to 25. And they said it wouldn't last. But I've been having a great time with this, of course, as I've been mentioning, and I hope all of you have been enjoying my different podcasts. I should say this, that when I originally started, it was an approach of hoping that I would frame these that would be more general collecting oriented, that everybody could see into their own particular collecting, whether it's sports memorabilia or comic books or something, and see the trends. And I was trying in the beginning to not necessarily focus too much on dolls, but I found that it just naturally happened because, well, it's my wheelhouse. This is what I know. And so everything became really focused in on dolls, and that's okay. What I'm hoping is, and for your friends out there that do collect other things, that you will be able to see within these episodes that while they may be doll-centric, I really do feel they offer something for every type of collector to introduce them to the podcast and let them have a listen. And who knows, they may fall in love with dolls too afterwards. But for those of you out there who are not doll collectors who do happen to tune into this, do keep in mind that there are great lessons for you as well in what you collect, in that through my experiences and my data and my walking through the collecting lands across the world and talking with collectors, that I think will actually have some value to you. So anyway, I've been having a great time with this, and we made it to episode 25. You know, it's interesting. The episode that lately I've been getting so much feedback on, as far as, wow, this really hit home with me. I really understand now a little bit more about why people stop collecting, what happens to them. And I think it's going to help me recognize certain things as well that I should do, because I want to go all the way to the end. And that is that Why Collectors Stop Collecting episode that I believe was episode 23. This one I've had, I don't know if it's the most popular episode. I don't think so. But certainly it is the one that I've had more people come back and talk to me about, either by email or in comments or text messages, that one really hit home for them. So it was really interesting. I didn't expect that. And if you haven't listened to it, I guess it's worthwhile. So get on over there and have a listen to that one as well, and go back all the way. If you have missed some of the earlier ones, I think you'll enjoy reeling in 25 episodes. I can't believe it's like 25 hours of listening almost now that you can have here at The Curious Collector. So I've been having a great time. I am coming to you now from Southern California, where it is a stunning day. Absolutely beautiful day here in California, and worked on a large-scale collection right now that we have completed, and I will be hitting a flight tomorrow, heading to Chicago, where I'm back on a 2-date table talk tour. Actually, I say Chicago, but I really should give a shout out to the idea that it is not really in Chicago. They're both in Wisconsin, just over the border. I always think of the movie Stripes, when Bill Murray, I mean, I'm going back in time now, if any of you remember the movie Stripes. And one of my favorite lines in that movie was they were breaking into Czechoslovakia to rescue a hostage. And Bill Murray says, "It's Czechoslovakia. It's like going to Wisconsin. You zip in and you zip out." So I always think of that as I cross the state line into Wisconsin. Clearly, I don't know why I told you that story, but we'll go with it. But I'm going to Wisconsin, and I have 2 doll clubs there. A lot of the Illinois and Wisconsin clubs have kind of combined, and we're seeing Wisconsin as a hub of clubs. I don't know what's going on in Wisconsin. Is there something in the water there? But it is, and this is going to surprise you, one of the hottest markets for doll collecting in the country. Yes, Wisconsin. And I can line up unbelievable names of great collectors there that are building fabulous, fabulous collections of incredible rare French bébés, German characters, number of different things spread out all over the state. And it's a beautiful state. I've been all through it, and it is really a hotbed of collecting. So if you haven't been to Wisconsin, get there. Dolls and cheese are a great combination. So I'm looking forward to that. And then I turn around and fly west again right from there, and I head to Australia. So I guess west and down, and heading back into winter because it's the middle of winter there. So I have all my winter clothes packed as well. That's a tough one when you head into multiple climates. So working on a collection in Australia, then up to Japan, working on a collection there, and back home for the big convention week, which will be coming up about a week after I land back home. So we got a lot on the plate. We've got a lot coming up. Today, we're talking about where there is chaos, there is opportunity. And this is something I've long believed in pretty much everything in life, especially when dealing with collecting itself, that chaotic moments in markets actually offer not a reason to panic and run, but a reason to dig in even more, because within them is incredible opportunities to maybe cash in, get in on something that you otherwise may have never been able to afford in the past. You might be able to buy better examples than you ever imagined you could get. These really are moments that every collector needs to pay attention to. Now, let me say this. I don't think I've ever seen a chaotic moment in general across the board where the entire market moves steadily downwards at a quick pace because of some catastrophic event. We've talked about COVID in the last episode, where it actually ended up sparking one of the biggest surges we've seen in the marketplace in years for a 2-year period. So you don't necessarily see a downturn that is complete. That is, every single category of doll, every single genre, every single thing seems to be falling. It doesn't work that way typically. What you have more are categorical shifts in the marketplace where certain things that may have been hot or popular at one point for varying reasons that we're going to talk about later on have hit a downturn. They don't necessarily resonate with a new generation of collectors. And a lot of times it is a temporary moment. It is a temporary shift. And it could be as much as a generational shift, or it could be just a pattern of trend right then at that moment. One of the things, and this is a little secret, I'm whispering now, so no one will hear me on this. You have to remember that in categories of specific dolls that are often really hot at one moment, not everything, but really specialized things, they can often be affected by just a few people coming in with a significant amount of wealth that are focused, dialed in on that particular category, and they start, I don't want to say butting heads, but butting bidding paddles out there and driving up the values of this, that everybody starts kind of running to the frenzy. That is an interesting takeaway with collectors. You, in many ways, are not always completely confident about your collecting, and that is, are you collecting what people really want? And my first thing is, you should be collecting what you want, not what other people want. But often collectors feel a lot more comfortable collecting in hot markets than they do in colder categories, in colder markets. So I'll give you an example. One of the common things that happens to me at auctions is I never have anybody ever come up and say, wow, I got carried away and I paid way too much for this piece because they're so hot right now. I don't know what I was doing. I just really got caught up in the frenzy of this. No one ever says that to me, which I find fascinating. However, what you do hear from a number of collectors coming up to me after an auction that bought a doll in that is in a kind of a cooled off or cooler market right now, got a really great buy on this, and it's a fabulous example. And they'll come up to me, and I swear to you, will say, I'm really scared. I got that doll really cheap. And I don't know, is there something wrong? Did I do the wrong thing? Nobody else was bidding on it. It is really fascinating that collectors feel a lot of times more secure if a lot of people are bidding on something. And if no one is, they have a tendency to feel a sort of insecurity, which goes against the grain of collecting itself, in that everybody is out there hunting for that, not just the Holy Grail, but getting that Holy Grail at a great price. Yet, in the end, when you do get it at a great price, you often are left feeling, I'm concerned now, I'm worried. So this is a real and identifiable anxiety, I think, that lies within collecting, that is a constant battle that I've seen over multiple generations. The important thing to remember in all of this is that every category of dolls is going to have ebbs and flows. Yes, I've even seen down markets in brew, as a matter of fact, over the years in my being in this business. And so you always have ebbs and flows where things are going to be really popular. And often, remember I mentioned, it can be just 4 or 5 major collectors of high wealth that are affecting that market, that they get all the pieces they want and they move on to something else, another category of dolls, and then they leave those categories that were hot and they start to fall a bit. And this is why collectors should constantly be paying attention, especially to auction prices, to kind of watch and see not just the prices items are bringing, but the trends in bidding. So why watching the auction itself to see how many people are bidding, how fast is the bidding, how's it moving. These are really important signs to get a feel for understanding the trends of that particular category. And we know within dolls, there are hundreds, my gosh, I guess I could say thousands of different categorical areas within subcategories within the area of figurative art. So they will ebb and flow constantly over the years for a number of different factors. And we'll talk about a lot of those as I go through a list of these today that might help you see opportunity in particular categories that I feel right now are actually approachable for a lot of collectors, more approachable than they've ever been, and great opportunities to not just get examples on the cheap. That's not necessarily the case always, but getting really top-end examples for less than you would pay in a really, really hot market. Now, let me give you 2 examples of this ebb and flow theory within collecting of particular categories that I think a lot of people can identify and will shake their heads right away. Oh, yeah, I've seen this. 2 different categories that give you an example. Now, these are not items which are in that chaos mode right now. That is, they are down in the market. They're actually really hot in the market right now. But interestingly enough, they came out of a period where they were really down in a market for a few years, and there was opportunity in the past that right now they're hot. So one of them is Schoenhut. I remember, and it wasn't that long ago, we're talking pre-COVID, so maybe 2015 to 2019 and that kind of period, there was like a good 5-year, and it may even extend back. I'd have to look at the data and see, but Schoenhuts were really kind of falling. There weren't a lot of collectors really active in Schoenhut buying, and the prices were incredibly reasonable on a lot of rare dolls, circus figures, some of the animals, some of the other characters. They were really kind of reasonable for a while. I mean, I remember people saying, oh, well, all the people who really identified with Schoenhut and loved Schoenhut, they're passing away, and there doesn't seem to be a new generation coming in that collects them. But I knew at the time, it was a perfect one that if we could take this podcast back to 2015, I would put this on the category of saying, here is chaos, here is opportunity. You should be going after Schoenhut. And sure enough, right after COVID, all of a sudden, Schoenhut started rising back. And now they're one of the most popular and fought over categories within doll collecting. Now, that may eventually change again. It could be 5 years from now, it could be 25 years from now that you'll see another little ebb and flow where Schoenhutz all of a sudden will hit a period where they're languishing a bit, they are bringing lesser money, and then everybody will go into that panic mode. Oh my gosh, there's no one left who wants Schoenhutz anymore. They're going to plummet out of control. And that's not the case. Again, it will come back. And so I think Schoenhutz offers us right now a great snapshot into these ebbs and flow. Another one that you'll be surprised about, because you think of it as this iconic and timeless doll that reaches so many generations. But Barbie, we know it's hot now, but I can tell you some periods over the past 30 years where Barbies were a bit on the downturn and there seemed to be less collectors involved and engaged in them, and prices were beginning to drop from, that heyday of the 80s that people talk about with Barbie. Well, yeah, that was primarily focused on vintage, and then it started dropping a bit and you didn't see as many Barbie collectors, and then all of a sudden new generations started coming in and it popped again. And boom, Barbie is hot. Now, will we see a downturn in Barbie at some point? Potentially. It could happen again. And it's typically going to be short-lived. And that's the moments you have to learn to identify in your collecting that these are great opportunities for you to dive into those markets. What's the benefit of this? Why should you watch so many different categories? Because one, as I've said in the previous podcast, the road of a collector should never be straight. And so if you are committed to the idea of making doll collecting a journey where you can explore many back roads, the time to explore those roads is when you see downturns in those particular markets. And what that allows as well is diversification of your collection. Now, again, diversification instantly brings up alarm bells of dolls are an investment. And you know as well from previous podcasts that I tell you they are not an investment financially. They are an investment in your personal joy. However, it is good to find ways to diversify your collection a bit more in order to allow for as good a return as you could potentially get. Whether that's more than you paid, whether that's less than you paid, at least it's as much as possible. When it does come time to sell, multiple categories will allow for you to have better overall results, because just as we talk about these ebbs and flows, remember, in the road of a collector should never be straight. I talked about how we talked about Schoenhutz. If you only collect Schoenhutz, if that is it, your entire purpose in life, and it comes to the point that you have to sell your Schoenhutz collection in, say, 30 years. What if at that moment Schoenhutz are in that downturn moment? And so by diversifying, you're allowing yourself that it's okay. Schoenhutz are down. I'm still going to sell because I've got this other category I collected, which is really hot right now. So these are great reasons why everybody should work hard to watch different categories, learn about them, see why they're trending up, understand why they're trending down. If you collect them, don't panic. See it as opportunity. Why do these things happen? And we've talked about that. You can have categories, and we'll talk about this with a few of them in a few moments, but you can have categories that I've said before have a couple of people that come in and really impact and drive that market wild for a few years. But you could have a big one. And this will be something that we will see over different generations, but the nostalgic effect on marketplaces. So I think you will all identify this right away. And we'll talk about it in relationship to different categories like composition dolls and Ginnies. But you have a moment typically in this ebb and flow of marketplaces in particular categories. You have this moment where an entire generation of collectors enters into their classic collecting age. That is, their 50s and 60s, they're entering, 70s, they go wild, 80s, they start paring down, and then that's it. And a lot of times, those collectors, how they come in, their gateway typically is nostalgia. So it's going to be dolls they may have grown up with. And then you will see how once those collectors begin to shift and pass away, the prices on that particular category of doll begins to drop. Now, Barbie's been shielded by this somewhat because it is multi-generational, but there are a lot of categories we'll talk about that had their peak in the moment of nostalgia collecting when collectors came in and were buying up pieces from there. They all passed away. Those markets dropped. But I'm going to tell you a story with composition dolls about how they will come back because it's really fascinating and I've seen it with other categories as well. One last thing I want to talk about before I go into some of these categories is to remember that there is no overall, yes, it's hot, no, it's not situation involved here. So there are nuances, X factors, I guess you could call them, within all of these things that can have variations. So as an example, the first nuance is certain categories of dolls that people may perceive as being really hot that I feel are just entering their momentum right now. They probably are going to have a streaming consciousness for multiple generations that are going to lift these pieces up even more. And I'm not going to get into those categories yet, even though I could say that I feel they are still underpriced. And two of them I'm going to name are going to be shocking to you because you all perceive them as being really hot in the market. But I believe they're just getting warmed up. And that's French fashions and Albus dolls. Now, why? Well, fashion dolls and French fashion is becoming a thing, and fashion is intersecting very much along the lines of dolls as we learn more and more about the importance of textiles and historical textiles and what they represent. And French fashions are one of the greatest models of this particular crossover interest that a lot of collectors are seeing. So we are shocked when we think about the prices some of the fashions are bringing, and I believe is just the tip of the iceberg of where the future potential is. So we're not talking about those necessarily. Those are, I want to call them emerging markets, I guess would be the word. All biscuits as well. When you talk about the trend towards small, that everybody loves small things now in their doll collecting. And I believe, again, just the tip of the iceberg, because really you can buy fabulous Albus dolls, really interesting pieces for $1,000, $1,500. Sure, some go $3,000, $4,000, $5,000, $6,000, but many of them are in that sweet spot, I guess you can call it, in collecting of that $500 to $2,000 range that has such a wide swath of buyers around the world. So another one, we're talking about small, but small bébés, sort of 12-inch and under, classic Brus and Jameaux. They could be emerging as well. You think they're hot, but they may be emerging. So we're not talking about those today. But two other nuances to understand. When I talk about some of these categories, remember, when I give you a category and we talk about it, my idea of them being down in the market doesn't mean that every single thing within that category is down in the market. There can be outliers, and it could be for a number of different reasons. You should go back to my episode on valuing a doll, where I can show examples and talk about examples of dolls that typically bring $500 that all of a sudden you'll have one that brings $10,000. That's really the same model. Why is that? And I've given you in that episode 7 different factors that could potentially affect and create this hot market within a cold market. I don't know how else to explain it. I'll explain it better as we get into a few of these categories and give you some examples of that. So that can be one of the interesting nuances. And then the other thing, it can work in reverse. There are categories that are perceived to be hot right now. Give you one example. Let's talk about Bru. People think Brus are hot. And yes, in general, they tend to be a very fought over, very sought after category that people really love. So you think and you say, Brus are hot. Well, within hot categories, you can have subcategories of particular models and particular styles that are not particularly hot. So Bru is a great one. I look at circle dot Brus and I see chaos. I see opportunity, because circle dot Brus, for some reason, some people cite the bodies, some people cite they're not as in tune with the face. It doesn't have that classic Brujun face. And I get some of those reasons, but they are still fabulous dolls, and they have been dropping as of late and presenting opportunities to collectors that I think they will come back again and start being recognized as being great opportunities and will go back up. But yet, this is such a complex one because then we can talk about Circle Dot brew, and I can zero in to say, okay, but if it's a 12-inch Circle Dot brew, a tiny size, and it's all original, it's going to pop. And that's going to bring a great price. But what you may find in this moment, that small Circle Dot brew, because Circle Dot brews are tending to be behind in the marketplace at this moment, not as popular, you might get that really fabulous Circle Dot brew that is a good size for you, that's all original. And you may think, I had to pay a lot for it, but it would have been a lot more if it was a really hot market for Circle Dot brew. So we're not going to go into every category of doll because this will be a 427-hour multi-part podcast in that case. But we're going to go into some general, bigger picture categories and talk about those and where I see opportunity for a lot of collectors. So it's not just talking about the complexities of this. I want to give you real hard data, good names, things that collectors, as you're going down these back roads in your collecting to find new categories, might want to be looking right now for incredible opportunities. First one, this is my biggest one of all. And this is, if you are not paying attention to this and jumping in as a collector, you are missing the boat on potentially one of the greatest moments of chaos in a particular subcategory market in doll collecting that may never, ever come back again. Automatons. And automatons is a fascinating study of ebbs and flows as well, because if we go back to 2005, 2006, 2007, really anywhere up from the late 90s up to about 2009, you are going to see a market that was the most frenzied market out there that we've ever seen. Automatons went wild, and we're bringing record price after record price, major collectors coming in and buying them. A lot of it impacted, I will say, by this thing we've talked about before, a few major wealthy buyers that were all impacting on high end and competing for them. And the prices went wild. And interestingly enough, I remember during that time that there were collectors that were so frustrated. They were so just like, oh, this is terrible. These are bringing so much, which I always find interesting as well. You can't win, it seems. And they just kind of got out of collecting. They just lost the spark and the interest, which I hate seeing, because I know these moments, as I've said before, you have the ebbs and flows. You're going to have a moment where they will start dropping back. And they did. After about 2010, we saw the prices first begin to drop when those major buyers, the half a dozen major buyers who were high wealth individuals that were battling for these, began to drop out of the collecting. They had it all. They passed away. They got instant enthusiasm, boredom. Could have been a number of different reasons, but they all seemed to come in at the same time and then go out at the same time. And so prices started coming down. And as the prices came down, you saw other things begin to affect the interest in these. You began to see panic. You began to see collectors think, well, I don't want to buy automatons. They're expensive, and look at how the prices are dropping. Yet it was a great opportunity. This was the moment. And now we are still seeing, this has been a long downturn for automatons. And we are seeing now about a 15-year period that they have been really dropping. And a perfect example is recently a Perot Serenading the Moon, which is one of my favorite pieces from automatons, typically would bring $30,000, $40,000 back in the day. We recently sold one that I believe brought $12,000. $13,000. I mean, this is a price that, wow, if you would dream of as an automaton collector, to be able to get such an important and beloved item as this. Okay, I will say that there are other things that come into play with automatons that I think are misperceptions out there for collectors. The big one you hear right now is people say, I love them, they are beautiful, and they are. I have been preaching the importance of automatons for years as one of the most visual and exciting categories within doll collecting that you can dive into. You don't have to become a total automaton collector, but to have some examples of these that interact with your dolls really gives a visual that is so appealing to a broader base of the others who come in to see your collection. It allows for movement. Florence always says music, motion, and fancy. And it's theater. But for a lot of collectors, they look at these classic doll collectors and they think to themselves, gosh, it's a beautiful, look at that. It has a Jameau head. It's a portrait head. It's beautiful. The fabulous movements. Look at that original costume, everything. But what happens if it doesn't work? And it does happen at times. You will have automatons that you buy that were working that in a few years you go to wind it up to show a friend and it doesn't work. It just seems to be frozen. And I get that and understand that that is a genuine concern for some people. But the thing you have to remember and collectors should keep in mind, and this is opportunity amidst chaos, is this perception with collectors now on automatons of that, is that they really aren't as daunting as you imagine in the repair aspect of these. I'm going to say, and somebody may argue this with me, but I've seen in our own office our ability to get the mechanisms working again, that 80% of the time, it's a very simple fix. That is, these are clockwork mechanisms that you could go find somebody who understands clocks, understands watches, understands these mechanisms, and they could go in and most likely probably do a few little adjustments here and there, and boom, it's working again. It's often really as simple as that. There are at times more complex repairs that may need to be done, but there are people out there that still do them. I talked to somebody recently who is an automaton collector that I mentioned this to, and he said that it's ridiculous. I know 4 or 5 people that are actively repairing automatons now that you can hire. And yes, the repairs can get expensive if they're complex, but often they're very cheap and simple adjustments that even if your husband is handy, if you have a husband that's active that probably would love the automatons as well, and some women, I mean, Terry in our office, our chief curator, is fabulous at going into the mechanisms and seeing how to make a little adjustments here and there to get them really working smoothly. So it's not as daunting as you think. You might be able to do it yourself. You might find your husband or partner could do it as well if they're handy, and they can be fixed. So that should not affect you, but it has been, I think, affecting the market somewhat. And I believe that's presenting incredible opportunity. Automatons, my number one opportunity right now amidst chaos. Get them while you can, because folks, it's going to come back. It's going to be 4 or 5 big major buyers are going to come in and drive another 15, 20-year frenzy in automatons. And you will look back and say, I can't believe I passed up on the time to buy those when I could get a Perot serenading the moon for $12,000. And that's what you're having right now. Get in on it. Another one, too, and this is one that I realize is a bit fringe from the doll perspective. They're figurative art, they're dolls in a sense, but Japanese dolls or Japanese figures that were having a trend for a number of years in 2000s up to about 2018, 2019, and then lately have seemingly kind of fallen in patterns of pricing and presented opportunities for collectors. And they are fabulous. Beautiful historical pieces with incredible stories, fabulous textiles, amazing relevance to an important culture. And they present beautifully in so many different decors within a home as well. Not even as a collection, but as decoration. They have it all. And they appeal to a broader base of the others, again, as I call them, non-doll collectors, who those are things they can actually kind of zero in on and see and identify with. So again, another genre to introduce to people within your collection that they get. and they understand. So lately, the pricing has been a bit less than stellar, with some exceptions. Obviously, remember we talked about exceptions within this, like a friendship doll, which brought a world record recently at one of our auctions, or certain really high-end fought-over pieces that have great historical importance. And I urge everyone to take time. If you haven't read Alan Scott Pate's books that he has done on Japanese dolls, you really need to dig in to try to understand and learn the background and the history and the stories these tell, because it is a remarkable art form. And the challenge, I think, and one of the reasons they have given us this moment within the chaos is they often are larger. I get that. They are bigger pieces. And I have collectors who look at them and say, for the area that piece is going to take, I could get 4 classic dolls in there, French dolls or something along those lines. And I see that, but everybody should have a representation of these. And again, it allows for a chance to, as I mentioned before, reach out to people who are visiting your home, visiting your collection, seeing your collection, to have another type of genre that they can identify with. And right now is a great buying moment to add in some of these into your collection. So the third one, we all know about this one because this has been a long time happening. And with the exception of the COVID spike of 2020 to 2022, we have seen these dolls falling and falling rapidly over the past 25 years. And that is stock German bisque, open mouth dolls, babies, anything along those lines, the entry-level gateway antique dolls. They have absolutely come down to historical lows in value as of the past 25 years, really, since eBay came along, since the great accumulator generation passed away and began flooding the market with them, and with the only exception being the 2-year COVID period, where if you listen to that episode, I explained you had the highest influx of new collectors in history coming into doll collecting at that moment. And they were entering in through these dolls and drove a spike up, nearly doubling and tripling the value of many of them. But it was short-lived. And now they have dropped back down to even further historical lows. And we are seeing unbelievable opportunity for collectors in this genre. I mean, I remember a Hilda, as one example, would bring $2,000 back in the 80s and 90s. You can get great Hilda examples now for $500 to $1,000. You can see it in even lesser babies. Bilos are $25 to $50 in many cases nowadays. And even beautiful quality antique bisque dolls in antique costumes that might sell for $100 to $200. This is cheaper in many cases than dolls you go buy in the store today that are new dolls. So you have a representation of quality antique dolls that have history, story. They have the appeal of that antique, the look of an antique, and it's basically at this point, it's becoming pocket change. You hear me joking in the past at auctions that, wow, that's cheaper than a tank of gas. Well, some of these dolls, by golly, they are. So if you are a collector on a budget who loves antique dolls, but you can't afford the mid to high range right now, you have a great opportunity to still enjoy collecting on a budget and have beautiful antique pieces within your collection that you can sew dresses for, that you can display in vignettes, that you can talk to people about the history of, because the reality is the others, again, people that come into your home and look at them, they're not going to really understand the nuances of one to another. $10,000 doll versus a $200 doll. They just see an antique doll. So you have a chance in this. And then the other thing that we've talked about in the beginning of why this presents opportunity, this is a chance where you can buy an actual all original, really beautiful example of one for not cheap. You'll probably pay a decent price, but you will pay a far less price than you did in the 90s for that same particular great all-original one. So jump in. Don't be afraid of these stock German dolls. Take a look at them. A lot of people say, well, I'm beyond that in my collecting now. Well, I think there are still opportunities within that you can get some great examples that can balance out your collecting right now. The next one And this is a fascinating one because it appeals to collectors who are tending towards the mid to high range, but they have still hit a moment of opportunity for a lot of collectors today, and that is German characters. Now, this one is maybe the more nuanced of all of them because German characters have become, for me, the most unpredictable market out there in trying to figure out and understand. You will have German characters that will bring absolutely fantastic prices. I recently had a Bauer and Daughter, as a matter of fact, German character that brought 4 times the estimate and ended up bringing like almost $30,000, over $30,000 with the buyer's premium. But then you have other things like I sold a Cameron Reinhardt 104, one of the absolute rarest German characters that you could ever hope to find, appeals to a very, very top echelon of character doll collectors. Now, it brought 36 or 38,000 plus the buyer's premium when there was a time this doll might have brought $100,000 to $200,000. So understand that even on the higher range of German characters, you're going to see wild fluctuations like this, and you've got to pay attention to them and watch these fluctuations and jump in where you see opportunity. The lucky buyer of that 104 was ecstatic and knew darn well that they had an historical steal on that particular doll because they've been a little bit unpredictable in the marketplace, and I don't understand why. 101s by Cameron Reinhardt, 114s by Cameron Reinhardt, 117s, 115s, all historical opportunities right now in the marketplace. There is chaos in the characters, and this is presenting opportunity for those who watch and see. Again, look for those really great examples that jump out at you with beautiful costumes that you can get in on and get the best example within that category for a lot less than you might have when characters were really hot back in the day. And they will get hot again, inevitably. The next one is, and this is falls kind of aligned with the German characters, and that is the American designed but German made dolls of the 1920s. Now, for those who aren't familiar, I'm going to throw out some names that will instantly help you understand what category this is. And we can talk about the most famous one of all. That's Grace Story Putnam, who created the Bilo. It's a German doll, but it was made by an American designer. You have Helen Jensen, Grace Corey Rockwell, and Rose O'Neill could even be thrown into that, though Cupies are a different niche entirely. So those dolls by these American designers and made in Germany are very, very soft in the marketplace right now. I recently had an auction in June with Nikki Kavicka's collection of where there were 5 really rare variations of Bilos designed by Grace Story Putnam, of which few even existed. And I think 3 of 5 or 6, I think, ended up not even selling. And we're talking about some of the rarest Bilos you could ever imagine. Other dolls that are hot were soaring in price throughout that auction. So it wasn't the auction. The auction was wild. Highest engagement we've seen in a while. Incredible amount of bidding. But you hit those dolls and boom. That was it. The bidding just dried up and everybody just kind of sat there looking at them. And they're fabulous dolls. I advise you go back and look at them and see that what an opportunity was missed within the panic of chaos that you could have had some of the rarest Grace Story Putnam creations ever done for a song. Let's call it a song. The next one, this is one that our producer Tammy Trujillo and I were talking about earlier because it happens to be an area that she collects and has been passionate about for years and has done writing and is even teaching a seminar in UFDC on a particular category of these, but that's composition dolls. Now, composition, we talked about nostalgic collecting, and here is our first one that will really zero in on this chart of nostalgic peaking with collectors and then the beginning of hitting what I like to call the doldrums. So let's go back in time. Collectors in the 1970s to early 2000s were coming into the classic collecting age of those who grew up with composition dolls. They were buying directly the dolls of their youth, and they were meaningful to them. We can take Shirley Temple as an example. Shirley Temple dolls, or any composition doll of the 1930s, which was the heyday. So they all spiked this market during this nostalgia frenzy of buying up composition dolls, things from their youth. They drove that market to where in the 90s, we saw the absolute peaking out of composition dolls. And then in the early 2000s, they began falling. And we're seeing now that continue to a point where I think we've reached the end of that. I think now we are going to begin to see a new rising of value in composition dolls. Why is that? Because in every nostalgia-driven market like composition dolls, and we'll talk about some others as well, like Ginny in a few minutes, you will see this nostalgia-driven rise. Then you will see it begin to fall as those collectors die. And then those dolls will hit a doldrums period like we've been in now. And all of a sudden, they will start to rise again. Why? Because they will hit the next level, and it will take time to get there. With the next generation of collectors, they will be recognized as antiques. They get older. The dolls become scarcer as well. You will see less of them out on the marketplace as we go through this cycling of periods. And as that supply and demand fluctuates and changes, you will see them get older, become more associated as being antiques, and a new generation of collectors will start again driving the values up, and then it will most likely stick into a more consistent market for a longer period of time. This is remarkable. Imagine this. Shirley Temple dolls. The first one came out in 1934, and we're 9 years away from that being the 100th anniversary of Shirley Temple. Think about that for a second. Put that into perspective. 100 years is the official guideline as to the classification of what is an antique. They will be antique dolls. All of these 1930s dolls will be antique dolls. And so you will begin to see compositions rising up. And another thing that I think will be important for people to recognize, or I should say this, how they will begin to develop in the marketplace is you will notice that composition dolls will start to be recognized not only as antiques, but as a unique vintage antique pop culture. Because composition dolls, in essence, are the first real pop culture movement in doll making, with all the celebrity dolls that were made, cartoon influenced dolls that were created during that time. So this is early pop culture. We all know that pop culture is trending upwards, and we're going to see millennials really driving that market, and they'll go back in time to say, hey, these are cool. This is early antique vintage pop culture. And so we'll start to see probably a rise again in Shirley Temple dolls. So this is a very broad category, obviously, but we talked about the trend of small dolls being really hot right now. However, what has that in turn done to large dolls? It's cooled them down. People are a little bit more nervous on the larger dolls because they see them not being quite as popular. And I see unbelievable opportunity on these. Now, it's interesting. What you end up happening, and what I notice in the marketplace, is you have the small dolls, so call them the 14-inch and under cabinet and very, very small petite. Those are the really hot, everybody's going after dolls. Then you get into the 15, 16-inch. These are bebés, I should say, not fashions, bebés. You get into the 15, 16-inch, and you go up into the, let's call it 32-inch range. And there you will see the prices. All of a sudden, there's not as much demand in those for some reason. People are not after them as much as they used to be when they were the classics. That's what everybody wanted. They didn't want the small ones necessarily. They wanted more of that sculpting and modeling and painting that was really prevalent and able to be easily seen on these more 20 to 25-inch classics, let's say it. Those are the ones that are really, at this point, becoming approachable opportunities for collectors. Now, you start getting in over 32 inches. You start getting into 34, 35, 36, and upwards. Now you're getting into another level of these are really rare dolls. So they will start rising up back in value and demand because they're so unusual to ever find. And for the collectors of large dolls out there, they are far and few between to locate dolls in this price range, especially with French bébés. So German child dolls, French bébés, anything in that 15, 16-inch size upwards to 32 inches, you are looking at really great opportunities right now. And there are still a lot of people that collect them. And guess what? They're going to come back and trend again. They really are. People will start recognizing and seeing in museums, which are starting to shoot and target for larger dolls because obviously they are visually better made for museums. When people start seeing them in museums more and more often, you will begin to see this market shift back. And classic size dolls will become the trend again. Half dolls. What the heck happened to half dolls? They were wild in the early 2000s. And my gosh, there were record-breaking prices left and right on half dolls. And I used to say in the auctions, my joke was always half the doll, twice the price. People loved half dolls. Now they are so reasonable. You cannot imagine. If you are a collector of half dolls today, you are living in a dream world because you can buy incredibly rare pieces for very, very reasonable prices. And I would say it's a great genre for you to cross over into as you are collecting something that may be hot right now. You might want to sit back and say, okay, well, what other market can I look at? Oh, let me start looking at half dolls a little bit and learning about some of them, their history, what are the rarity features of them, and let's go in on half dolls. So that's another one too. Wax dolls as well. Now, I should say this. Wax dolls, I've noticed, are trending upwards all of a sudden. People are starting to get and understand the importance historically, especially of early, really fine, all-original English wax dolls. They are moving upwards as of late. So this may be a last moment on wax dolls as they start returning back into being really popular again, and people recognize the important art of wax dolls and the costuming, which are often a feature of them. But they went through a period of downturn where a lot of collectors were thinking, oh, I'm worried about taking care of it and this and that. And I'm getting them out of collections where they've been sitting in this collector's home for 40 years. I've just packed some here in California in a large collection, and they were there 40 years. And this is in California, and they're perfectly fine. They're absolutely pristine. So as long as you don't put them in the window and display them in the sunlight with the afternoon sun silhouetting off their faces, or you display them over your active working fireplace, I think you're going to be fine. So people are starting to learn that and get away from their fear of wax dolls, and they are having a moment again, starting to rise back. But I don't think we've come anywhere near close to where they should be going. And so still do present an opportunity. Okay, this will probably get a lot of comments on later on and people talking to me about, and it often does. But I would say dolls with flaws, damages, small restorations, something along the line of maybe original firing marks, anything that you might consider to be a, I'm putting in quotations, flaw. These are opportunity. You know my motto at an auction, what I always say when we have a beautiful doll that has a hairline, I say, I'd rather own a beautiful doll with a hairline than an ugly doll that's perfect. So I know that's harsh, but let's go with it. But it's true. It really is, in essence, true. And I'm seeing signs of recognizing that, look, these are really old antique dolls. They are of fragile material, and they have a lot of age and have passed through generations of hands and owners, and some of them may have little things. That's okay. I get it if half the head is broken off and you've got a piece of a head. That is not what I'm talking about. I am talking about something that may have a faint hairline that you only see with your left leg lifted up, pointed in the right direction with 3 flashlights sticking in the head. And everybody says, oh, there, it has a hairline. I mean, I don't know anybody who displays dolls in their cabinet with 3 flashlights in the head and comes and points at that doll and says, here's my doll with a hairline. No, you say, here is my beautiful Bru June. And nobody's going to notice it has a hairline. It may be very, very faint under the wig, and you got it for a reasonable price. And visually, that doll is beautiful. It still tells a story. And it is an incredible opportunity for the collector who maybe they can't afford, let's call it $25,000 for a spectacular face brew. And they get this for $8,000, $9,000, $10,000. Well, why not? There it is. Jump in, grab it. They are unbelievable opportunity for you out there, and take it. Dolls in folklore costumes. What is up with this? I cannot figure this one out. Now, this is not an ebb and flow situation. This is a type of doll that has always had trepidation and pushback from collectors for reasons that I cannot fathom. Now, let me explain what I'm talking about here. Let's take a French fashion. Let's take a classic Jumeau French fashion poupée, okay? Let's put it in a beautiful, classic French fashion costume, gown, enfantine costume, whatever you prefer. And we will see people bidding wildly everywhere for that doll. Now, take that same doll and put it in a ethnic folklore costume of Brittany, let's say, and you watch. Nobody will bid. It's incredible. And that costume is original. It is representation of a particular culture. It has amazing opportunities, again, to connect with the others that you show your collections to, because that's something, again, they can identify with. Oh, I have family that came from the Brittany area and immigrated to America in the 1800s. Wow, this is what they would have worn back in the day there. And so this is wildly available to collectors who may want to buy French fashions, can't necessarily afford the ones in the elegant costumes, to look for ones in ethnic costumes. And you could spend a lifetime just collecting these folklore costumes. You know, Florence's favorite book, I think she even admits this and might have even said it in the podcast, favorite book she ever did was an auction and a book that we produced on dolls in folklore costumes, French dolls in folklore costumes. And you'll see German dolls in ethnic folklore costumes as well, with the same sort of, again, I use the word trepidation that collectors have. I don't get it, because they are historically really, really important pieces. The next one, these are not dolls, but they hit a peak of interest in the 90s and early 2000s, where prices were soaring on paintings of children with dolls. And everybody wanted them. They wanted to add them into their homes because they represented something very romantic and appealing on a wall, if you will, as a work of art that corresponded to their passion in collecting for dolls. And as well, they kind of help tell a story of what it is you're collecting. That is, you could see the child holding this doll, and often it would be a Jumeau or a early China or something along those lines. And you would really bring to life, in a way, the understanding of that period in time and what these dolls represented to these children. Now, let me also add this. You have paintings that many times are signed, are known, noted artists of high respect. And I've been watching these paintings that might have in the early 2000s brought $8,000, $9,000, $10,000, $15,000 are often available when they come up at auction for a couple of thousand. And so you can introduce traditional, what we would call traditional artwork in your home that represents the items that you're passionate about, to help show the others, again, tell a story about your collection. So a great area that you should jump in, especially if you've got wall space. Nothing more beautiful than these paintings of children with dolls. On a more contemporary basis, I mentioned and talked about composition dolls as being nostalgia, but two other categories within what we call contemporary, but they're not really contemporary. They span sort of the 1950s, 60s era, 40s even. But Ginny is one that, again, this is the one that we saw that real nostalgic cycle move through the pricing of Ginny, where in the 90s, early 2000s, Ginny were peaking in pricing as the collectors who had them as young girls were all engaging with Ginny collecting and buying them up, and then they began passing away. And over the past few years, we've seen the pricing dropping on Ginnies and now presenting opportunity. And we will see that again as they become that entry into antiques or kind of cool retro looking items of the past, you will see Ginnies start going up. And Ginnies are fantastic because there's so many wonderful different outfits and styles and designs to collect. I can see somebody coming into that and having a really good time. And Terry Lee is another one. I don't know, Terry Lee, it's such a fascinating American story of doll making, and they have absolutely dropped to historic lows. I mean, you used to get incredible prices on good Terry Lees. I remember some examples bringing thousands of dollars. And now the top pieces might bring a couple hundred, and a lot of them are bringing $25, $50, $75. And they are a great area to collect that is telling a interesting story of American doll making during that period. And that whole story of Nebraska to California is an interesting one. I don't necessarily mean that you have to completely buy 500 Terry Lees, but you can certainly see opportunity right now to add a few of them into your collection for very reasonable prices to have a whole historical context of these dolls within your collection and telling a framework of the evolution of dolls, let's call it. And I'll throw in just quickly a few other categories. I know this one's going on a while. It's a complicated podcast to do because of all the nuanced ideas of pricing in hot and cold categories of dolls, but I'll just throw in two others quickly to finish this off, and that's SFBJ characters or any dolls of the early 1900s, call it 1900 to 1915 period. There are really good opportunities for collectors right now. And you can find a lot of these in original costumes that are fabulous and present approachable, affordable ways to get into French dolls. A great entry point for those just starting off in collecting, maybe on more of a budget, want to get into French dolls and show the entire history and breadth of the French doll making. You can start backwards. That is, start with SFBJ, and as you build wealth and build more knowledge and build more confidence, work yourself down into the earlier periods and the upper echelon, find Jameau bebes, Bruce, and that type of things. But SFBJ's right now, really good opportunity for collectors. And Parians and Chinas. Now, this is very difficult because, let me just say, so-called Parian. Florence always insists on my using that term and gets very upset if I don't. That is a doll collector term. And one day I'm going to do a whole podcast on doll collecting terminology and how these names have stuck to things that really aren't appropriate or right, but we know them as so-called Parians. And then early China dolls, primarily made in Germany. Very early representation of the evolution of doll making. So it kind of bridges the gap between earlier English and French and continental wooden dolls into the classic golden age of the bisque doll. These were the bridge in between and really tell a great story of that time period. Interestingly enough, often associated many of them with not necessarily doll making firms, but became doll making firms, but might have come out of, one example, Royal Copenhagen in Denmark. So these are really important dolls that are very, very early, much earlier than the classic age of Jameau, as an example, or Bru, and yet are fabulously beautiful dolls. You think of a rare china and you think, oh, wow, that brought $5,000. But $5,000 would be a standard pricing for many of the classic bebés. And these are earlier, much rarer to find, and visually stunning dolls with a great story. Now, this is an interesting one because I would call this not so much as chaos, because I've never really seen Parians and Chinas being hot, let's call it, where everybody's in a frenzy. They are going wild. I've always seen them in a pattern of they have a niche following. They have a hardcore group that really is passionate about the subject and engaged in the collecting, but it's never gone broad. It's never gone to a bigger cross-section of collectors around the world. So I would actually call them, this is a new term I'm going to introduce into this podcast, and that is a sleeper. And that is dolls that have never really taken off, but I think will eventually hit a moment where they will suddenly come into trend. I mean, French fashions were ultimately, I would say, sleepers for many, many years and hadn't hit a real broad target audience like we're seeing now. And I think so-called Parians and Chinas are about to hit that very, very soon. There are many more. We could go on for hours talking about this. I've done 3-hour lectures on a similar subject, and it is an endless array of many different things. The way you learn about this is you watch the auctions, you watch the engagement, you watch what takes off, you watch what seems to be affordable and approachable, and you start working in your collecting to have the confidence. And this is the important thing. You have to have confidence to buy in these markets when there is chaos. If you have that confidence, you can build a fabulous, great collection on a lesser budget with opportunities to not just own an example from that category, but the best examples from those categories. So don't be afraid. Learn, study, have confidence, get out there, be happy when you get that doll that nobody else bid on. Don't be sad. Don't wonder, what did I do that's wrong? Be happy about it. You just did a great thing. You bought in chaos. You are going to build a great collection as a result.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of The Curious Collector. The Curious Collector is hosted by Stuart Holbrook and produced by Tammy Trujillo. We invite you to follow us on social media and feel free to leave any questions you have for Stuart on Facebook at Stuart Holbrook-Theriault or follow the Theriault Company Facebook page. And you can stay up to date with the latest auctions and events at Theriault.com. We'll talk to you on the next episode of The Curious Collector.